went on a short overnight trip with my family to Macau, and I have to say, it's one of the most interesting places ever. It's got this really layered history, so you have the strong Catholic vibes from the Portuguese influence in the 1500s, then you had the casino boom in the 2000s, so it feels like a mix of Vegas, Lisbon, Porto, and Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s. And it's all just a 2-hour bus ride away from Hong Kong on one of the longest suspension bridges in the world. We stayed in a hotel near the Cotai Strip, so this whole area is reclaimed land where most of the casinos are, but everything is super new. I was really fascinated by the architecture as well, just like the sheer scale of these replicas. There were the Houses of Parliament from London, a replica of the Eiffel Tower, and the whole place is just this maze of malls, hotels, and casinos. I'd say it's basically like the Vegas Strip, but grander and newer and less chaotic. After dropping our bags off, we went straight to the Macau Peninsula. This is the historic center of Macau, and it's even more dramatic at night. Some parts of it really reminded me of Porto. The steep, narrow streets, the little squares, even down to the blue and white wave tiles. We were super hungry, and the taxi driver recommended this spot called Gallo. It's Portuguese Macanese food, and I love that they just had stir-fried veg on the menu. Just a plate of that was exactly what I needed. It was steaming hot, super comforting. And then we got the codfish cakes, which I think are the bacalhau fritters. Really creamy inside, comes with the ketchup, and then the roast suckling cake, which was crispy, fatty, just so delicious. But my favorite was the Polva no Forno, which is the baked octopus. This one you have to get. It's got caramelized onions, spices, and potatoes. There's just so much flavor, and again, it was just the perfect thing for cooler weather. We finished things off with a chocolate souffle. It looks huge, but it was like 90% air, and it tasted homemade. It was not too sweet, and the cocoa flavor was really mild. The old buildings here are full of character. It was the first time I personally saw so much colonial architecture in Asia. It kind of felt like a mini Europe. There's a seminary with a nativity scene put out and a library. Obviously, I was on the hunt for Pasteis de Nata, and my first stop was Mantegaria. I went to the one in Portugal years ago and loved it. These ones are a bit milkier and they come with the cinnamon on top. It tasted just how I remembered, and it was perfect with an espresso. As we were making our way up the old streets to the ruin of St. Paul's, we came across the Lamgo mansion. It belonged to a Chinese businessman, and it was built in 1889. It was a super cool courtyard house tucked away in a busy street, and it was pretty well preserved. You could see the decorative structures over the doorways were mostly intact, and it really just felt like stepping back in time. The ruin of St. Paul's is the remains of a 17th century church. The rest of the church was lost in a fire, and it was one of the largest Catholic churches in Asia at the time. The view as you ascend the stair is so iconic. Going around the back, you can see that the structure is reinforced with steel, and then there's a bit of a crypt, and you can kind of read a little bit more about the history of the place. There's this really cute street called Travessa da Paixão off the side of the ruin. It has really colorful facades, loads of people taking pictures, and then we even found a little movie theater tucked away in one of the buildings. Don't forget to turn around because you get a really stunning view of the ruins framed by the buildings. Another church I visited was St. Dominic's Church. It's a 16th century Baroque style church with a striking yellow facade, and it incorporates Chinese style roof tiles and doors made of teak. And a short walk away is the Cathedral of the Nativity of Our Lady, Macau. Originally, this was a wooden chapel built in the 17th century, and I was really surprised to find that it was completely rebuilt in concrete in 1937. around to Panpan Bakery for another snack. Their pastries are known for being very aesthetically pleasing as well as their unique flavors. So I settled on the kaya and peanut pandan salt bread and the black sesame basque cheesecake tart, which is what they're known for. The salt bread was alright, like maybe it tasted better earlier in the day when it was fresh from the oven. The salted coconut kaya in the center was really nice, but I wish they kind of stuffed it with more filling. And then the black sesame tart was just pure heaven. I love the flavor of black sesame and it was really rich and creamy here. The center was a little bit melted, just how I like my cheesecake. And the cookie crust had a really nice snap to it. Definitely want to come back here and try more of their flavors. The old town is really charming as well. We came across this little alleyway with stalls and lanterns. I kept stopping to look at the old shop fronts and shutters because they really reminded me of Hong Kong back in the day. And then for dinner, we went to this really cute Portuguese restaurant called Three Sardines. It was along a quiet street and the interiors were quite intimate and cozy. At that point, we weren't super hungry, so we just got some small bites. We got the 3 baby sardines. They were really fresh. And then their battered and fried green beans. They don't look like much, but lots of flavor. We also got beef cubes with this pickled veg in a stew. And my absolute favorite was the Pasteis de Chaves, which is their flaky beef pastry. Pastry was excellent, just so light, and the beef was well seasoned. This was the favorite thing I had from this place. And then we got the duck rice, which was nice and hot. A little bit dry though, I wish there was a bit more duck. I think probably some of the larger plates like the bacalhau and the meat and rice would be better if you're more hungry. And overall, it's a nice ambiance for a meal. On the way back to the bus stop to Cotai, we went to check out the Grand Lisboa Hotel. With this crazy silhouette, it's one of the most notable buildings in the Macau skyline, and it opened in 2007. I went to check out the interior, and there are all these like grand things inside, like this huge carved ivory sculpture with delicate scenes of a forest and houses. There's also a bunch of fancy restaurants inside, which we didn't go to. And then we spent the second day exploring Taipa, which is just north of Cotai. And this was originally a small fishing village that developed into a tourist destination in the 90s. One of the main things to see here are the Taipa houses. These are several blue traditional Portuguese houses by the wetlands, and you can kind of spend an hour or so just wandering around between them. When we went, there was an art exhibition with local artists reflecting on Portugal's colonial and slave history. There was also a little gift shop with surprisingly lots of Portugal-related souvenirs. It kind of felt like I was in a gift shop in Portugal, if that makes sense. My favorite thing was the Macanese Living Museum. So here they recreated domestic scenes of affluent Macanese families in the 1920s and 30s. And it was super interesting to see the furniture design and the interiors and this like blend of Chinese and Western taste. Like you'd have these Ming ceramics next to Jesus iconography. And then as you head to the Taipa village, it feels like you're in China again. There was this flower park that currently had a purple flower showcase. So there were Chinese people having wedding shoots and the elderly were out and about. You had your aunties in puffy jackets posing next to flower bushes, of course. And the weather was perfect. I mean, you could have sat and read a book for a few hours. Taipa village is really cute. There's Rua de Cunha, which is their busy main street with loads of food. It was super hectic though, there were long queues everywhere. Yi Sheng Yao Gongxi, which is a pretty well-known milk pudding shop, had a location here. I thought it was so cute. I love the little cow mural on the side. And you can get your milk pudding hot or cold, served with various toppings. I got a cold one with red beans, and the pudding was so silky and smooth. I'm not a huge fan of fresh milk, but the flavor is very subtle. It's super refreshing and light, and the red beans are not too sweet. And then my mom got a Garnsop Zhonglai, which is a hot milk pudding infused with ginger syrup. And then continuing my custard tart journey, I was really eager to check out Lord Stow's bakery. The queue was wrapped around the block, but thankfully it moved pretty quickly. We got a box of 6, and when I bit into it, oh my gosh. Dare I say these are the best custard tarts I've ever had. First of all, they were so hot I nearly burned my mouth eating them, which I actually thought was great because they were so fresh. And then the pastry was so gorgeous, super light and flaky. And the custard was more eggy than Mantegaria, which I personally prefer. So this is definitely worth the queue. At that point, I needed a coffee just to cut through all the sugar, so I stopped by a specialty coffee shop called Lamgo Coffee and Roasting, and I got a Syphon brew coffee with the Brazilian beans. Took the coffee to go and went to Loike, which is an old Tatantang famous for their Macanese pork chop buns. I immediately felt at home here with the plastic tables and chairs. We got one regular pork chop bun and one with a pineapple bun. At first I thought a pork chop bun sandwiched between two pieces of bread with nothing else would be a bit dry, but the pork chop was so tender and juicy. Bread was super light as well. It felt so indulgent and worth trying at least once. And then finally on the way back, we stopped by Goat Baker's, which also has some really interesting pastry flavors. At this point, we only had the stomach space to share one pastry. So we got this Earl Grey cannelli, which is really cute. And then there's this little gazebo by the main road where we sat and chilled for a bit before walking back to the hotel. I rarely take such spontaneous trips, but I had so much fun. Macau is tiny, so it's the perfect place for an overnight trip if you're ever in Hong Kong. And yeah, like the unique history of the food, architecture, the city planning. I'd say it's a lot more peaceful and less hectic than most parts of Hong Kong, but at the same time, parts of it make me so nostalgic for what Hong Kong probably used to be like back in the day.